The scream tore through the canyon air just as Vernon Jameson was about to water his horse at the creek, and without thinking, he spurred his mount toward the sound, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with knowing someone was in real trouble. He had been riding through the backcountry of Wisconsin Territory for 3 days now, making his way from Mineral Point, where he worked cattle for the Morrison Ranch, heading toward Galena, just across the border in Illinois, to pick up supplies. The year was 1852, and the territory was still wild enough that folks traveling alone took their lives in their hands, but Vernon had always been confident in his abilities with both horse and rifle. The scream came again, weaker this time, and Vernon pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of a steep ravine that cut through the landscape like a wound. He dismounted quickly, securing his reins to a scrubby pine, and approached the edge carefully. The ravine dropped away sharply, at least 30 feet of rocky slope covered in loose shale and scattered boulders. At the bottom, crumpled against a large rock, was a woman in a dusty blue dress, her dark hair spilled around her shoulders, one leg twisted at an angle that made Vernon's stomach clench. "Madam," he called down, "Madam, can you hear me?" She stirred slightly, lifting her head with obvious effort. Even from this distance he could see blood on her temple, dark against her pale skin. Her voice when she spoke was barely more than a whisper, but it carried up to him on the wind. "Help me, please." Vernon assessed the situation with the practiced eye of a man who had spent his 26 years learning how to survive in unforgiving country. The ravine walls were steep but not impossible. He would need rope, and he would need to be careful not to start a rock slide that would bury them both. He moved quickly back to his horse, pulling his coiled rope from where it hung on his saddle, along with his canteen and the leather satchel that held basic medical supplies. His mother had been a practical woman who believed in being prepared, and she had taught him how to tend wounds before she passed 5 years back. He returned to the edge and called down again. "I am coming down to you right now. Do not try to move. Can you tell me your name?" "Sophia," she managed. "Sophia Parker." "All right, Sophia, my name is Vernon Jameson, and I will get you out of here right now." He tied one end of his rope securely around the trunk of the pine tree, testing it with his full weight before he began his descent. The shale shifted treacherously under his boots, and twice he had to catch himself as rocks gave way beneath him, but he kept his movements steady and controlled. The last thing either of them needed was for him to go tumbling down and end up injured himself. When he reached the bottom, he knelt beside her immediately, his hands gentle as he examined her injuries. Up close, she was younger than he had first thought. Probably no more than 22 or 23, with fine features and eyes the color of summer moss. Those eyes looked up at him now with pain and fear and something like relief all mixed together. "My horse," she said, her voice thready. "He spooked at a snake. I tried to hold on, but the saddle cinch broke and I fell." Vernon nodded, his attention on the gash at her temple first. It was still bleeding, but not badly enough to be immediately dangerous. Her left leg, however, was another matter. "I need to check your leg," he said quietly. "It's going to hurt. I'm sorry." She nodded, biting her lower lip, and he ran his hands carefully along her calf and ankle. When he reached her shin, she cried out despite herself, and he felt the distinct shift of broken bone beneath his fingers. He looked up at her, his blue eyes meeting hers steadily. "It is broken. I need to splint it before I can move you, and then I need to get you up out of this ravine. Do you hurt anywhere else? Your ribs? Your back?" She took a shaky breath, clearly trying to assess her own condition. "My ribs hurt on the left side, but I can breathe. I do not think my back is injured. Everything moves except my leg." "Good. That's good." He opened his satchel and pulled out a flask of whiskey he kept for emergencies. "Drink some of this. It will help with the pain." Sophia took the flask with trembling hands and swallowed, coughing at the burn. Vernon used the brief moment while she was distracted to look around for something he could use as a splint. He found 2 pieces of relatively straight wood among the debris at the bottom of the ravine and tore strips from his spare shirt to use as binding. "This is going to hurt," he warned her again, and when she nodded he worked as quickly and efficiently as he could, straightening her leg and securing the splint. She made a sound that was half sob, half scream, and then went limp, having fainted from the pain. Vernon was almost grateful for it. He bound her ribs as best he could through her dress, then fashioned a sling from his rope that would allow him to carry her up the ravine wall. Getting them both up was the hardest physical labor Vernon had done in years. He secured Sophia to his back, making sure her injured leg was supported, and then began the climb. His muscles burned, and his hands were torn and bleeding by the time he hauled them both over the lip of the ravine, but they were up. He laid Sophia down gently in the grass and collapsed beside her for a moment, catching his breath. She stirred as consciousness returned, her eyes fluttering open. "We are out," she whispered, seeming surprised. "I told you I would get you out of there," Vernon said, managing a tired smile. "But we are not done yet. Where were you headed? Do you have family nearby?" Sophia's expression clouded. "I was traveling from Milwaukee to Mineral Point. My father sent for me after my mother died last winter. He works at the lead mines there. I was supposed to meet a wagon train in Dodgeville, but I got turned around and my horse—" She trailed off, looking around. "Is he all right? Did you see him?" Vernon had been so focused on Sophia that he had not thought to look for her horse. He stood now, scanning the area, and spotted the animal about 100 yards away, grazing peacefully as if nothing had happened. The saddle hung half off its back, the broken cinch dangling uselessly. "He is fine," Vernon assured her. "Better than you are, at any rate. Mineral Point is where I am from. I work at the Morrison Ranch just outside of town. I was heading to Galena for supplies, but I will take you home instead. Your father will be worried sick if you do not arrive when expected." "I do not even know if he is expecting me at a particular time," Sophia admitted. "My letter said I would arrive sometime in late September. I've been traveling for 2 weeks already." Vernon considered this. It was September 20th, and the days were getting shorter. "We will get you to Mineral Point," he said firmly. "But I need to make a travois to transport you. You cannot ride with that leg, and I cannot carry you the whole way. Can you stay still here while I work?" "I do not think I have much choice," Sophia said, and despite everything there was a hint of humor in her voice that made Vernon like her immediately. He set to work cutting branches with his knife and lashing them together with rope to create a frame he could drag behind his horse. He retrieved Sophia's horse and salvaged what he could from her saddlebags, including a heavy wool blanket that he used to cushion the travois. When everything was ready, he lifted Sophia as gently as he could and settled her onto the makeshift litter. She was clearly exhausted, her face pale except for 2 spots of fever on her cheeks, and he worried about infection setting in before he could get her to proper care. "We will stop for the night when it gets dark," he told her as he mounted his horse and started them moving at a careful walk. "But I want to cover as much ground as we can first. Try to rest." Sophia closed her eyes, trusting him with her safety in a way that made something warm unfold in Vernon's chest. He had never been the kind of man who attracted much female attention. He was quiet and serious, more comfortable with horses than people, and the few women in Mineral Point had always seemed to look past him toward men who were more charming or wealthy or refined. But something about the way Sophia had looked at him when he promised to get her out of that ravine made him feel like maybe he was exactly the man she needed right now. The afternoons stretched long as they traveled. Vernon kept his horse to a steady walk, avoiding rough terrain as much as possible. But he knew every jolt and bounce had to be agony for Sophia, despite the splint and the whiskey. She did not complain, though. When he checked on her, her jaw was clenched and her hands were fisted in the blanket. But she met his eyes and nodded when he asked if she could continue. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Vernon found a sheltered spot near a stream where they could make camp. He helped Sophia drink some water and eat a few bites of the dried beef and hardtack he carried in his saddlebags, then built a small fire to ward off the chill that came with nightfall. He had only one bedroll, so he gave it to Sophia and wrapped himself in his coat, settling against a tree where he could keep watch. "Tell me about Mineral Point," Sophia said softly from where she lay near the fire. "I have never been there. I do not know what to expect." Vernon thought about his hometown, trying to find words to capture it. It is a mining town, rough around the edges but growing fast. A lot of Cornish miners came over in the 30s and 40s when the lead deposits were discovered. They dug their homes right into the hillsides at first, which is why folks started calling it the Badger State, like badgers burrowing into the ground. There's a main street with shops and saloons, a church, a school. The Morrison Ranch where I work is about 5 miles outside of town. We run cattle and supply beef to the miners. "It sounds like a hard place," Sophia said quietly. "It can be," Vernon admitted, "but people look out for each other mostly. Your father, what is his name? I might know him if he's been there a while. Robert Parker. He came out 2 years ago after the farm failed. He wanted to make enough money to buy new land, start over. But then my mother got sick, and I stayed with her until the end. He sent me a letter with money for passage, and said it was time I came west to be with him. Vernon did know Robert Parker, at least by sight. He was a decent man who worked hard and did not drink up his wages like some. I know him. He works at the Bevins mine. He will be glad to see you, broken leg or not. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was very soft. Thank you for saving me today. I thought I was going to die in that ravine. You do not need to thank me, Vernon said gruffly. Any decent person would have done the same. Maybe, but you are the one who did. She paused, then added, You can sleep, you know. I will be fine for a few hours. But Vernon did not sleep, not really. He dozed in fits and starts, jerking awake at every sound, afraid that Sophia might need something or that some animal might approach their camp. When dawn broke gray and cool, he was already up and moving, checking Sophia's splint and bringing her water before he even thought about his own needs. They traveled for 3 more days like that, making slow but steady progress toward Mineral Point. Vernon hunted when he could, bringing down a rabbit the 2nd day and a wild turkey the 3rd, making sure Sophia had real food to keep her strength up. At night they talked, sharing stories about their lives in a way that felt oddly intimate despite the circumstances. Vernon learned that Sophia loved reading and had brought a trunk full of books with her on the journey, books that were now lost somewhere along with the wagon train she had missed. Sophia learned that Vernon had taught himself to read and write using his mother's Bible and whatever newspapers made their way to Mineral Point, and that his dream was to own his own ranch someday, a place where he could build something lasting. By the 4th day, Sophia's fever had worsened despite Vernon's best efforts to keep her wounds clean. She drifted in and out of consciousness, and Vernon pushed his horse harder than he should have, driven by fear that he might lose her after all. When the buildings of Mineral Point finally came into view in the late afternoon, he felt a relief so profound it made his knees weak. He took her straight to Doc Henley's house, a whitewashed building on the edge of town. The doctor, a gruff man in his 50s with gentle hands and shrewd eyes, took one look at Sophia and immediately cleared his examination table. How long has she been like this? He demanded as he cut away the splint Vernon had made. The fever started 2 days ago. I kept the wounds clean, but we have been traveling rough. Doc Henley examined Sophia thoroughly, his expression growing more concerned as he worked. Finally, he looked up at Vernon. You did good work on this splint, son. Probably saved her leg. The break is clean and it is set right, but she has got an infection in that head wound, and it has got into her blood. I need to treat her, and she needs to stay here where I can watch her for at least a week, maybe 2. Whatever it costs, Vernon said immediately. I will pay. The doctor raised an eyebrow. You family? No, I just found her. But I'm not leaving her to fend for herself. Vernon hesitated, then added, Her father is Robert Parker at the Bevins mine. Someone should get word to him. I will send my boy, Doc Henley assured him. Now you get yourself cleaned up and rested. You look like you have been dragged behind a horse for a week. Vernon knew he should go, should trust the doctor to care for Sophia now, but he found himself reluctant to leave. He reached out and took Sophia's hand, which was hot and dry with fever. You fight, he told her, even though she could not hear him. You fight and get better. Doc Henley's expression softened slightly. She will be all right, son. I've seen worse pull through. Come back tomorrow. Vernon finally left, but he did not go far. He took a room at the boarding house run by Mrs. McCarthy, a kind widow who took one look at his haggard face and insisted on feeding him a hot meal before she would let him go upstairs to rest. He bathed and shaved and fell into the narrow bed, and for the first time in 5 days he let himself sleep deeply. When he woke it was morning, and his first thought was of Sophia. He dressed quickly and made his way back to Doc Henley's house, where he found the doctor drinking coffee in his kitchen. She made it through the night, Doc Henley said before Vernon could ask. Fever broke about an hour ago. She's sleeping now, real sleep, not fever dreams. Her father came by late last evening. He sat with her for a while, but I sent him home to rest. Vernon felt the tension drain out of his shoulders. Can I see her? Briefly. Do not wake her if she is still sleeping. Sophia was indeed asleep, looking small and fragile in the doctor's bed. The bandage on her head was clean and white, and though she was still pale, she no longer had that frightening flush of fever. Vernon stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing, and realized with a jolt that somewhere during those 4 days of travel he had started to care about this woman in a way that went beyond simple human decency. He returned to the boarding house and tried to figure out what to do with himself. He still needed to get to Galena for those supplies, but the thought of leaving Mineral Point while Sophia was recovering felt wrong. In the end, he sent word to Morrison Ranch about what had happened and arranged for one of the other hands to make the Galena run. Morrison's foreman sent back a message saying to take whatever time he needed, which was decent of him. Vernon fell into a routine over the next week. He would go to Doc Henley's house in the morning and sit with Sophia for a few hours, reading aloud from the doctor's small collection of books, or just talking to her about nothing in particular. In the afternoons, he would find odd jobs around town, fixing fences or hauling supplies, anything to keep his hands busy and earn a little money to offset the doctor's fees. In the evenings, he would return to check on Sophia one more time before going back to the boarding house. Sophia grew stronger each day. By the third day, she was awake and alert, able to sit up and take solid food. By the fifth day, she was insisting she felt well enough to leave, though Doc Henley firmly told her she would do no such thing until he was satisfied her leg was healing properly. She bore the forced inactivity with good grace, though Vernon could tell it chafed at her. "You must have better things to do than sit here with me," she said to him one afternoon, as he read aloud from a volume of Tennyson's poetry that Doc Henley's late wife had owned. Vernon looked up from the book. "Not particularly." "What about your job, the ranch?" "I told them I needed time. They understand." Sophia studied him with those green eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Why are you doing this, Vernon? You saved my life. You went above and beyond any obligation you might have had, but you are still here." Vernon set the book aside, buying himself time to think. The truth was, he had been asking himself the same question, and the answer both thrilled and terrified him. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said finally. "I do not know. Maybe I just do not have anywhere better to be." "I do not believe that," Sophia said softly, "but I am glad you are here anyway." Their eyes held for a long moment, and Vernon felt something pass between them, some acknowledgement of what was growing between them, even if neither was quite ready to name it yet. Robert Parker came to visit his daughter every evening, and Vernon always made himself scarce during those times, feeling like he was intruding on private family business. But one evening, Robert caught him as he was leaving and asked if they could speak. "I want to thank you properly for what you did for my girl," Robert said. He was a stocky man with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had worked outdoors his whole life. "Doc Henley told me how you found her, how you got her out of that ravine and brought her all the way here. That took real courage and skill." "I just did what anyone would do," Vernon said, uncomfortable with the praise. "No," Robert said firmly. "Most men would have been too scared to go down into that ravine, or too careless and gotten themselves killed trying. You saved her life, and I will not forget that. If there is ever anything I can do for you, anything at all, you just ask." Vernon nodded, moved by the sincerity in the older man's voice. "Just seeing her get better is thanks enough." Robert gave him a long, measuring look. "You care about her." It was not a question, and Vernon did not try to deny it. "I do, but I know I am just a ranch hand with nothing to my name. I'm not trying to presume anything." "My daughter is smart enough to know a good man when she sees one," Robert said quietly. "What happens from here is between you and her, but you have my respect, Vernon Jameson, and that is worth something." 2 weeks after Vernon had first found her, Sophia was finally released from Doc Henley's care. Her leg was healing well, though she would need crutches for several more weeks, and the wound on her head had closed cleanly without any sign of infection. Robert had arranged for her to stay with him in the small house he rented near the mine, and Vernon helped transport her there, along with the few belongings she had managed to keep from her journey. The house was modest, but clean, 2 rooms with a stove and a table and simple furniture. Sophia looked around with interest, clearly trying to imagine making a home here. Vernon set her trunk down carefully, the one Robert had been keeping for her since her arrival in town. "Thank you," Sophia said, and there was more than simple gratitude in her voice. "For everything, Vernon. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Vernon said, aware of Robert watching them from the doorway. "I am just glad you are all right. I should go now, let you rest and settle in." He turned to leave, but Sophia reached out and caught his hand. "Will I see you again?" Vernon looked down at her hand in his, small and fine-boned, but with surprising strength in the grip. "If you want to." "I want to," Sophia said firmly. "I would like that very much." So Vernon began calling on Sophia, properly, the way a man courted a woman he was interested in. He would come by in the evenings after his work at the ranch was done, cleaned up and presentable, and they would sit on the small porch and talk while Robert puttered around inside, giving them a semblance of privacy. Sometimes Vernon would bring things, wildflowers he had picked on the ride into town, or a book he had borrowed from someone thinking she might enjoy it. Once he brought a pair of crutches he had made himself, better balanced and padded than the rough ones Doc Henley had provided, and the way Sophia's face lit up when she tried them made him feel 10 feet tall. As September turned into October and the leaves began to change color, Sophia grew stronger. She started helping her father keep house, learning to navigate with the crutches well enough to cook and clean. Vernon would often arrive to find dinner waiting, and Robert would invite him to join them, and they would sit around the small table like a family, talking about their days and making plans for the future. Vernon had never been much of a talker, but something about Sophia drew the words out of him. He found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, about his dreams of owning land, about his mother, and how much he missed her wisdom, about the loneliness that had been his constant companion since her death. Sophia listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, sharing her own stories in return. She told him about growing up on the farm in Wisconsin, about her mother's final illness, and how helpless she had felt, watching her waste away, about her fear and excitement at coming west to start a new life. "I thought I knew what I wanted," she said one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I thought I would come here and help my father for a while, and then maybe I would teach school or find work as a seamstress or something respectable like that. But now I do not know. Everything feels different than I expected." Vernon understood what she meant, because everything felt different for him too. Before Sophia, he had been content with his life, or at least resigned to it. He worked hard, saved what money he could, and figured someday he might have enough to buy some land and build something of his own. But he had never really let himself imagine sharing that future with someone else, never let himself hope for the kind of partnership his parents had shared before his mother died. Now, sitting beside Sophia with the autumn air cool against his skin and her profile outlined in the dying light, he could not imagine a future that did not have her in it. "Different does not have to be bad," he said quietly. Sophia turned to look at him, and there was something in her eyes that made his breath catch. "No," she agreed, "it does not." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and Vernon knew he should say something, should tell her what was in his heart. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped by old fears and insecurities. What if he was wrong about what he saw in her eyes? What if she saw him as nothing more than the man who had rescued her, a debt of gratitude rather than something real? Before he could work up the courage, Robert came out onto the porch carrying a pot of coffee, and the moment was broken. October gave way to November, and Vernon continued his courtship with patient determination. He was not a man who gave up easily once he had set his mind on something, and he had definitely set his mind on Sophia Parker. He could see her feelings for him in the way her face lit up when he arrived, in the way she laughed at his jokes, even when they were not particularly funny, in the way she found excuses to touch his hand or his arm when they talked. But neither of them had spoken the words that would make it real, and Vernon was starting to worry that if he did not act soon, he might lose his chance entirely. The first real snow came in mid-November, a light dusting that turned the world white and clean. Vernon arrived at the Parker house that evening with a proposal that had nothing to do with marriage, though he desperately wished it did. "The Morrison Ranch is having a social next Saturday," he said, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands like a nervous schoolboy. "Nothing fancy, just dinner and some dancing for the Hands and their families. I was wondering if you and your father might like to come, as my guests." Sophia's eyes lit up. "A social? Really? Oh, I would love that. I have not been to a real party in years. Then her face fell as she looked down at her leg, still splinted though healing well. But I cannot dance, not like this. You do not have to dance, Vernon assured her. There will be food and music and conversation. I just want you to be there. With me, he thought, but did not say. Robert, who had been listening from his chair by the stove, spoke up. We will come. Sophia needs to get out and meet more people anyway. She cannot spend all her time cooped up in this house or listening to you two moon at each other on the porch. Vernon felt his face heat with embarrassment, but Sophia just laughed. Papa? I am just saying what is obvious to anyone with eyes, Robert said, but he was grinning. Go on, Vernon. Tell us the details. The week leading up to the social seemed to drag on forever. Vernon threw himself into his work at the ranch, helping to prepare for the event and making sure everything would be perfect. Morrison himself was a good employer who believed in keeping his workers happy, and the social was an annual tradition that everyone looked forward to. There would be roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread and pies, and a couple of the hands played fiddle well enough to provide music for dancing. When Saturday finally arrived, Vernon took extra care with his appearance. He had one good suit that he had bought for his mother's funeral, and he brushed it until every speck of dust was gone and pressed it as smooth as he could manage. He borrowed a wagon from the ranch so that Sophia would not have to ride horseback with her legs still healing, and drove into town to collect her and Robert in the late afternoon. Sophia took his breath away when she opened the door. She wore a deep green dress that brought out her eyes, and she'd done something complicated with her hair that made her look elegant and sophisticated. She smiled when she saw his expression, a little pleased and a little shy. You look beautiful, Vernon said, and was proud that his voice came out steady despite the way his heart was hammering. You look very handsome yourself, Sophia replied, and the warmth in her voice made him feel like maybe, just maybe, she felt the same way he did. The ride out to the Morrison ranch took about 30 minutes, and Vernon spent the entire time acutely aware of Sophia sitting beside him on the wagon seat, her father behind them in the bed. They talked about inconsequential things, but Vernon could feel the anticipation building between them, the sense that something important was going to happen tonight. The ranch was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Lanterns had been strung between the barn and the main house, casting warm pools of light in the gathering darkness. The smell of roasting meat filled the air, and Vernon could hear laughter and music drifting from the barn where the dancing would take place. He helped Sophia down from the wagon carefully, making sure she was steady on her crutches before offering his arm for extra support. Let me introduce you around, he said, and proceeded to do just that, taking pride in presenting Sophia to his fellow ranch hands and their families. Everyone had heard the story of how he had rescued her from the ravine, which had been embellished with each retelling until Vernon hardly recognized it, but people were genuinely warm and welcoming to Sophia and her father. Morrison himself came over to greet them, a tall man with gray hair and a commanding presence that came from years of being in charge. So this is the famous Sophia Parker, he said, his eyes twinkling. Vernon has talked of little else for weeks. I'm glad to see you looking so well, young lady. That was a nasty fall you took. Thanks to Vernon, I'm still here to talk about it, Sophia said, smiling up at Vernon in a way that made his chest feel tight. He is a good man, our Vernon, Morrison agreed. One of the best hands I have ever had. Honest, hard-working, reliable. You could do a lot worse. Vernon wanted to die of embarrassment, but Sophia just laughed. I am beginning to realize that, sir. Dinner was a lively affair, with long tables set up outside where everyone could sit together and share the meal. Vernon made sure Sophia was comfortable, fetching her food and drink and generally hovering until she told him to stop fussing and eat his own dinner. The food was excellent, hearty and plentiful, and the conversation flowed easily around them. Robert seemed to be enjoying himself as well, trading stories with some of the other men about mining and farming and the challenges of making a living in this still wild country. After dinner, people began to drift toward the barn where the dancing would take place. Vernon helped Sophia navigate the uneven ground, his arm solid and steady under her hand. Inside, the barn had been swept clean and decorated with more lanterns, and a small group of musicians were tuning their instruments in one corner. The fiddle player started up a lively tune, and couples began to form on the makeshift dance floor. Vernon found Sophia a seat on a hay bale that had been covered with a blanket and knelt in front of her, looking up into her face. "I am sorry you cannot dance," he said softly, meaning it with everything in him. "You deserve to be out there spinning around with everyone else." "I do not need to dance to have a good time," Sophia assured him. "Being here with you is enough." Then she paused, a mischievous glint coming into her eyes. "Although if you wanted to dance with other girls, I would understand. You should not have to sit out just because I cannot join you." Vernon shook his head firmly. "I do not want to dance with anyone else. I only want to be with you." The words hung in the air between them, more serious than he had intended, but Vernon did not take them back. It was true. Over the past 2 months since he had found her broken and bleeding in that ravine, Sophia had become the center of his world. He thought about her constantly, looked forward to seeing her with an eagerness that colored every other aspect of his life. He had never felt this way about anyone before, and it scared him and exhilarated him in equal measure. Sophia reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Vernon Jameson, are you trying to tell me something?" Vernon took a deep breath, gathering his courage. This was it, the moment when everything would either come together or fall apart. "I'm trying to tell you that I love you," he said, his voice low and intense. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you in that ravine, so brave and determined to survive. And every day since then, I have fallen a little more. You are smart and kind and funny, and you make me want to be a better man. I know I do not have much to offer you right now, just a ranch hand's wages and some dreams about the future. But I swear to you, Sophia, if you give me a chance, I will spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy." Sophia's eyes were shining with tears, but she was smiling, a brilliant smile that made her face radiant. "Vernon, you beautiful fool," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Do you really not know? I love you too. I have loved you for weeks now, maybe from the moment you promised to get me out of that ravine and then actually did it. You are the kindest, most honorable man I have ever met, and yes, I will give you a chance. I will give you all the chances in the world." Vernon felt like his heart might burst out of his chest. Without thinking, he leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and careful, like she was something precious that might break. Sophia kissed him back, her free hand coming up to cup his cheek, and for a long, perfect moment, the rest of the world faded away, and there was nothing but the two of them and this feeling between them that was too big for words. When they finally pulled apart, Vernon realized that the music had stopped and everyone was staring at them. Someone started to clap, and then everyone was applauding and cheering, clearly delighted by the romantic scene they had just witnessed. Vernon felt his face go hot, but he could not stop grinning. He looked over and saw Robert Parker standing near the barn door, smiling and shaking his head in a way that clearly said, "About time." The rest of the evening passed in a happy blur. Vernon stayed by Sophia's side, holding her hand and stealing kisses when he thought no one was looking, though, of course, everyone was looking and commenting and generally treating them like they had just provided the entertainment of the decade. Vernon did not care. He was too happy, too full of joy and hope and plans for the future to worry about a little teasing. When it was time to leave, Morrison pulled Vernon aside. "I assume this means you will be wanting to marry that girl," he said bluntly. "Yes, sir, as soon as she will have me," Vernon replied without hesitation. Morrison nodded, looking pleased. "Good. You need someone to settle down with. I've been meaning to talk to you about the future anyway. You have been with me for 5 years now, and you have proven yourself a dozen times over. I'm getting old, Vernon, and I have been thinking about succession. I do not have any children of my own, and my nephew, who was supposed to inherit, has decided he would rather practice law in Chicago than get his hands dirty ranching. I'm proposing a partnership. You put in your sweat and expertise, and over time you buy in until you own half the place. When I die or retire, it all becomes yours. What do you say?" Vernon stared at his employer, barely able to process what he was hearing. "Sir, I do not know what to say. That is incredibly generous." "It is practical," Morrison corrected. "I need someone I can trust to carry on what I have built here, and you are that person. Think about it. Talk it over with your young lady. But I would like an answer soon." Vernon promised he would think about it, though in truth there was nothing to think about. This was the opportunity he had been dreaming of, the chance to build something lasting, to have a real future to offer Sophia. He climbed up onto the wagon seat beside her, his mind racing with possibilities. "You look like you just won a horse race," Sophia observed, leaning against his shoulder as they started the drive back to town. Robert had dozed off in the back, leaving them a semblance of privacy. Vernon told her about Morrison's offer, watching her face carefully to gauge her reaction. When he finished, Sophia was quiet for a moment, and he felt a flutter of worry. Maybe she did not want to be a rancher's wife. Maybe she had other dreams for her future. But then Sophia looked up at him, her eyes serious and intent. "That would mean we could really build a life here," she said slowly. "Not just you working for wages, but actually owning something, being partners in the ranch. Vernon, that is wonderful. But are you sure you want that life with me? We have only known each other for 2 months." "I am sure," Vernon said without hesitation. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I know it is fast, but when something is right, you just know. I want to marry you, Sophia Parker. I want to build a life with you and raise children with you and grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Sophia laughed, a joyful sound that echoed in the quiet night. "You already asked me that tonight, remember? And I already said yes. But I will say it again. Yes, Vernon Jameson, I will marry you. 1,000 times yes." They were married 6 weeks later, in a small ceremony at the Mineral Point Church with Robert and Doc Henley and half the town in attendance. Sophia had to walk down the aisle on crutches, her legs still not fully healed, but Vernon thought she was the most beautiful bride he had ever seen. She wore a simple white dress that had belonged to her mother, carefully preserved and altered to fit, and she carried wildflowers that Vernon had gathered himself from the meadows around the ranch. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Vernon kissed his bride, he felt like the luckiest man alive. They had a small reception at the boarding house, Mrs. McCarthy outdoing herself with food and decorations, and then Vernon took his new wife home to the ranch where Morrison had given them a small cabin to live in while they worked out the details of the partnership. The cabin was modest, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs. Vernon carried Sophia over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and set her down gently on the bed he had made up with fresh linens and a quilt his mother had sewn years ago. They made love slowly and carefully that night, Vernon mindful of Sophia's still healing injuries, and afterward they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. "I want at least 4 children, Sophia said sleepily, her head on Vernon's chest. "Maybe more. I always wanted a big family." "4 sounds good," Vernon agreed, running his fingers through her hair. "We can fill this cabin with noise and laughter, although we might need to build an addition at some point." "Or build a whole new house," Sophia suggested. "A big one, with room for everyone. We could design it ourselves, put in everything we ever wanted." They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming, and when they finally fell asleep, it was wrapped around each other, safe and warm and completely content. The first year of their marriage was not without its challenges. Learning to live together, to compromise and communicate, and work as a team took effort and patience. The ranch work was demanding, especially as Vernon took on more responsibility as Morrison's partner. Sophia struggled sometimes with the isolation of ranch life, missing the companionship of other women and the opportunities for education and culture that had been available in Milwaukee. But they faced every challenge together, supporting each other through the difficult moments and celebrating the victories. By spring, Sophia's leg had healed completely, though she walked with a slight limp that only showed when she was tired. She threw herself into making their cabin a home, planting a garden and learning to preserve food for the winter, sewing curtains and pillows to make the stark rooms more comfortable. She also started tutoring some of the ranch children who lived too far from town to attend school regularly, finding fulfillment in teaching even if it was not in an official capacity. Vernon proved to be a natural at ranch management. He had a gift for understanding cattle and horses, for knowing when to push and when to hold back, for seeing problems before they became crises. Morrison increasingly left the day-to-day operations in Vernon's capable hands, and the ranch prospered under their combined leadership. In August, exactly 1 year after Vernon had found Sophia in that ravine, she told him she was pregnant. Vernon was overjoyed, immediately becoming protective and hovering in a way that both amused and exasperated Sophia. He wanted to wrap her in cotton and keep her safe from every possible harm, remembering too vividly how fragile she had looked, broken and bleeding at the bottom of that ravine. "I am not made of glass," Sophia reminded him regularly as her belly grew round with their child. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." And she was fine. In March of 1854, Sophia gave birth to a healthy baby boy with Vernon's blue eyes and Sophia's dark hair. They named him Samuel, after Vernon's father who had died when Vernon was young. Vernon held his son for the first time with trembling hands, awed by how small and perfect he was, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. Sophia was a natural mother, patient and loving, but also firm when needed. She had help from the ranch women, who all seemed to have advice about nursing and sleeping and every other aspect of baby care, but mostly she trusted her instincts and did what felt right. Vernon tried to help as much as his work would allow, changing diapers and walking Samuel when he was fussy and generally being the kind of involved father that was unusual for the time. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Emma, and 2 years after that, another son they called Thomas. The cabin grew crowded, and Vernon began making plans for the bigger house they had dreamed about on their wedding night. Morrison, who by this time had more or less retired and left the ranch entirely in Vernon's hands, gave him a piece of land on a hill overlooking the main pastures, and Vernon and Sophia spent months designing their dream home. It took 2 years to build, working in stages as time and money allowed, but when it was finished in the spring of 1860, it was everything they had imagined. A large 2-story house with a wide front porch and windows that let in plenty of light, with 4 bedrooms upstairs and a big kitchen and parlor downstairs. Sophia cried when she walked through the completed house for the first time, overwhelmed by how far they had come from that desperate day in the ravine. They moved in just before their 5th child, another daughter named Catherine, was born. By this time, Vernon had officially bought out Morrison's share of the ranch and was the sole owner, a cattle operation that employed 15 hands and was known throughout Wisconsin Territory for producing quality beef. Robert Parker had retired from mining and moved into their old cabin on the ranch property, happy to help with his grandchildren and potter around fixing things. Life was busy and sometimes chaotic, with 5 children ranging from infant to 8 years old, but Vernon and Sophia thrived on it. They had built something real and lasting, not just the ranch, but a family and a community. Their home became a gathering place for neighbors and friends, known for Sophia's hospitality and Vernon's quiet generosity. The war years from 1861 to 1865 were difficult. Vernon was too old and too essential to the ranch operation to be drafted, but several of their ranch hands went off to fight and did not come back. Sophia threw herself into the war effort, organizing the women to knit socks and roll bandages and send packages to the soldiers. They took in a family whose father had been killed at Gettysburg, giving them work and a place to live when they had nowhere else to go. Through it all, Vernon and Sophia's love for each other only deepened. They had been tested by hardship and blessed by fortune, and they had emerged stronger together. On quiet evenings when the children were finally asleep, they would sit on the porch of their big house and talk about everything and nothing, Vernon's arm around Sophia's shoulders, her head on his chest, completely at peace. "Do you ever think about that day in the ravine?" Sophia asked one such evening in the summer of 1868. They had been married 14 years, and somehow Vernon loved her even more now than he had on their wedding day. "Sometimes," Vernon admitted, "I think about how different our lives would be if I had ridden a different direction that day, or if I had been too afraid to climb down to you." "I think about it too," Sophia said softly. "I think about how you promised to get me out of there right now, and you did. You have been keeping that promise ever since, in a way. Every day you make me feel safe and loved and protected, like you are still carrying me out of that ravine." Vernon tightened his arm around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You carried me out too, in your own way. I was stuck in a different kind of ravine before I met you, alone and just going through the motions of life. You gave me a reason to really live, not just survive." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the cicadas sing and watching the stars come out one by one. Inside the house, they could hear the faint sounds of their children settling down for the night, occasional giggles and thumps that meant someone was out of bed when they should not be. Vernon smiled, thinking about going in to check on them soon, tucking them in one more time. "I want you to know something," Sophia said, turning to look up at him in the gathering darkness. "Every single day since you saved my life, I have thanked God for putting you in my path. Every happiness I have had, every blessing has come from that one moment when you heard me scream and decided to help. You are the best man I have ever known, Vernon Jameson, and I am so grateful that I get to spend my life with you." Vernon felt his eyes sting with unexpected tears. After all these years, Sophia could still move him with her words, still make him feel like the luckiest man alive. "I love you," he said simply, because sometimes the simplest words were the truest. "I will always love you, until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Sophia whispered, and kissed him with the same passion and tenderness that had marked their entire relationship. They had 3 more children over the next 10 years, bringing their total to 8, 5 boys and 3 girls. Their eldest son Samuel grew up to take over much of the ranch operations, working alongside his father with the same dedication and skill that Vernon had shown. Emma, their oldest daughter, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher and eventually opening her own school in Mineral Point. Thomas went into business, starting a supply store that served the ranches and farms in the surrounding area. The younger children were still finding their way, but each showed promise in different areas. Vernon and Sophia aged gracefully together, silver threading through their dark hair, lines deepening around their eyes and mouths from years of laughter. Vernon's hands grew rough and scarred from decades of ranch work, but they were still gentle when they touched his wife. Sophia's beauty deepened with age, her face showing the character of a woman who had lived fully and loved deeply. Robert Parker lived to see all of his grandchildren born, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1875 at the age of 72. He was buried in the Mineral Point Cemetery, his funeral attended by nearly everyone in town, a testament to the respect he had earned over his years there. Vernon grieved the loss of his father-in-law, who had become a true friend and mentor, but found comfort in knowing that Robert had lived to see his daughter happy and settled, surrounded by the large, loving family she had always wanted. Morrison died 2 years later, leaving a small portion of his savings to Vernon and Sophia in his will, along with a letter thanking them for giving him purpose in his final years and for preserving the ranch he had built. Vernon made sure the old rancher was buried with full honors and commissioned a plaque that hung in the main barn commemorating Morrison's vision and leadership. By 1880, Vernon and Sophia were grandparents themselves, Samuel having married and produced 3 children of his own. The ranch now sprawled across several hundred acres and employed over 30 hands, one of the most successful operations in southern Wisconsin. Vernon had achieved every dream he had ever dared to have and more, but when people asked him about his success, he always credited Sophia. "None of this would exist without her," he would say, gesturing at the house and the barns and the fields full of cattle. "She is the one who made me believe I could be more than just a hired hand. She is the one who stood beside me through every setback and celebrated every victory. Everything I have built, I built for her and our children." On September 15, 1882, Vernon and Sophia celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that seemed to include half the county. Their 8 children and growing number of grandchildren surrounded them, along with friends and neighbors and ranch hands both current and retired. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat, and toasts were raised to the couple who had built such an impressive legacy. But the moment Vernon treasured most came late in the evening when the party was winding down and most of the guests had gone home. He found Sophia standing on the porch of their house, looking out at the land they had built together, her face peaceful in the lamplight. Vernon came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest the way he had done 1,000 times before. Sophia leaned into him with a contented sigh, her hands covering his where they rested on her stomach. 30 years, she murmured. "Can you believe it has been 30 years since you made me your wife?" 32 since I found you," Vernon replied. 32 years since the best day of my life." Sophia laughed softly. "I seem to remember that day involving me screaming in pain at the bottom of a ravine. How could that possibly have been the best day of your life?" "Because that was the day I found you," Vernon said simply. "Everything good that has happened since then stems from that moment. Our children, this ranch, this life we have built together, it all started when I heard you scream and rode toward it instead of away." Sophia turned in his arms so she could face him, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. "And I fell in love with you the moment you climbed down into that ravine and promised to get me out. I knew right then that you were someone special, someone I could trust with my life. I have never regretted that trust, not for a single moment." They kissed, softly and sweetly, the kiss of two people who had loved each other for decades and would continue loving until death separated them. Around them, their legacy stretched out in every direction: the house they had built, the children they had raised, the land they had tamed, the community they had helped create. Vernon and Sophia lived well into their 70s, defying the odds for their time and place. They saw their children grown and established, their grandchildren coming of age, even a few great-grandchildren born. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, with help from his younger brothers, and became something of a local institution, known not just for quality cattle but for fair treatment of workers and innovative ranching techniques. Through it all, through the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and setbacks that make up any long life, Vernon and Sophia remained devoted to each other. They were still holding hands when they walked through town in their 60s. They still stole kisses in the kitchen when they thought no one was looking. They still sat on the porch in the evenings and talked about their days, finishing each other's sentences the way only couples who have been together for decades can do. Vernon passed first, on a bright spring morning in 1895. He had been out checking on the cattle with Samuel when he simply collapsed, his heart giving out after 73 years of steady beating. He was gone before they could get him back to the house, dying in the fields he had loved so much with his son's hand gripping his. Sophia was devastated, but not broken. She had known this day would come eventually, had even discussed it with Vernon in those frank conversations that long-married couples have about mortality and legacy. She made sure he was buried with full honors on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone that read, "Vernon Jameson, beloved husband, father, and friend." For 2 more years, Sophia lived on, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still active in running the household and offering advice about the ranch when asked. She spoke often of Vernon, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had not known him as well as she had. She told stories about his courage and kindness, about how he had saved her life and then spent the rest of his life making her happy. On a warm September evening in 1897, Sophia passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 70 years old, and she had lived a full and remarkable life. Her children buried her next to Vernon on that hillside, adding her name to the stone, along with an inscription she had requested, "Together again." The ranch continued for generations after them, passed down through their children and grandchildren, each generation adding their own chapter to the legacy Vernon and Sophia had begun. But even decades later, the story of how it all started was still told, the romantic tale of the cowboy who heard a woman scream and rode to her rescue, who climbed down into a steep ravine and promised to get her out right now, and who ended up rescuing himself in the process. Their great-great-grandchildren would stand on that hillside where Vernon and Sophia were buried and look out at the sprawling ranch below. And they would know that all of it, every fence post and barn and grazing cow, every tradition and value that made their family what it was, had its roots in that one desperate day in 1852, when a cowboy found a woman injured in a ravine and decided her life was worth risking his own. It was a love story written in hard work and devotion, in the daily choice to stand together against whatever the world threw at them, in the family they built and the legacy they left behind. It was proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that true love, the kind that lasts a lifetime and beyond, is always worth fighting for.